Good evening, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about the fight review and my fight analysis of the David Benavidez versus Demetrius Andrade fight. And, of course, for those of you that kind of saw my previews and my fight predictions and my videos leading up to the fight, you know that I thought that this fight was a very big fight for both of their careers. Obviously, it was going to be. But the reason why there was so much on the line for this fight is because both of these fighters, they've been kind of looked at as monsters or respective boogeymens for their weight divisions for a very long time now. And, both of them are kind of looking for the bigger fights in their career. However, whoever the loser of this fight was going to be, it was potentially going to be a very bad dead end for their career. And both fighters really needed to prove themselves. Could David Benavidez prove himself to be the monster, or El Monstro, as many people overall would claim that he would be? And could Demetrius Andrade, could he prove himself overall to be the big threat that he claimed himself to be all these years? And the big question is, of course, because Andrade, he was the one that, kind of moved up to the 168-pound weight division, and he's never won a belt there. Did he prove himself against David Benavidez? He certainly did prove himself against David Benavidez. He proved me right about him all this time, which is that even though he's a decent talent, he's been the most overrated talent and the most overrated fighter probably within that of the past 10 plus years. And I don't want to necessarily shit all over Demetrius Andrade. I give him a lot of credit. He showed a great amount of heart in this fight, and he's always showed that he's wanted to take the biggest fights. I have no ill will towards Demetrius Andrade, but once again, I'm a very logical and a very blunt channel. And when it comes to this, I was doing a live commentary, and for those of you that actually tuned in, certainly I thank you for those of you that tuned in and commented. But I actually had a couple people, I think one or two people that said that they predicted that David Benavidez was going to get a mid-round TKO or KO in this fight. And I said, I just don't see that happening because I think that Andrade, I think that he'll last a little bit more than that. Well, for those of you that did not end up watching the fight was stopped after 6 rounds. And the reason why the fight was stopped after 6 rounds is because Andrade, he was having a very good first 3 rounds. On my scorecard, I actually gave Andrade the first 3 rounds on my scorecard because I thought that he landed the cleaner and more impactful shots. Now, rewatching the fight on YouTube, I actually think overall that you could have gave Benavidez some more rounds in the early part of the fight. But it was also very clear that the judges, that they were looking to give it to David Benavidez, and I said that was going to happen. But after those first 3 rounds, I'm not sure if it was because of the clinch, with David Benavidez. I'm not sure what it necessarily was. But Demetrius Andrade, he literally had no stamina after round 3. He literally had none. I don't think that in a big fight like this, other than maybe that of Canelo versus Demetrius Bivol, and Canelo added a little bit too much muscle mass for that fight. And maybe with Andrade, there was a similar problem. I don't know. But Andrade has always kind of known to tire out in the second half of fights. It's just kind of what he does. He loses a little bit of esteem. He loses a little bit of power. He loses a little bit of his ability. But to lose that amount of stamina within the first few rounds, especially with this clearly being the biggest fight of your career, it was just a very poor performance by that of Demetrius Andrade after that of the first few rounds. And I've always told people this about Andrade, just in my personal view, even though I always thought that he was a great talent and I always thought that he was an A-grade level fighter. I never seen this boxer, I never seen this fighter that many people always claim to say that he had a skill set out of this world, and that, he was a guy that's going to dethrone Canelo and beat all these guys, that he's the best 154-pounder, now he's the best middleweight, he'll become the best super middleweight in the world. I just never seen a fighter like that. I seen a fighter that was very relatively talented, but also a fighter that wings his punches a little bit too wide, a guy that has a little bit of overrated defense, a guy that does not have super duper great power, and a guy that's a little bit chinny, a guy that can be knocked down. I think that he's a very talented fighter. But, coming into this fight, a lot of the LDBC and the media channels and, a lot of the guys, let's be real, of Demetrius Andrade's, ethnicity, they were trying to, pump him up and say, oh, he's 10 times better than what Caleb Plant is, and all sort of stuff. And don't get me wrong, listen, at the end of the day, that's just normal for boxing. I'm not trying to offend anyone. If you're a Caucasian, you're going to try to pump up the fighters, that most relate to you. If you're a Latino, you're going to try to pump up the fighters that most relate to you. It's just going to happen in boxing. All right, because to you, that's basically you fighting against, or your nation fighting against that other fighter. because, boxing is a very big race and pride sport. It just is, all right, because it's a one-on-one fight. And a fight is always usually what matters at the end of the day whenever it comes to life and athletics in most people's minds. Because even if you lose to someone, in a soccer match or a basketball match, someone might still have their ego or their pride intact if they could potentially kick your ass or beat you in a life and death battle. But what ego are you going to have when that person pretty much beats you in a mano fight or battle? You're not really going to have that much. So that's why a lot of people, they're so prideful in this sport. But that's what I've always said about Demetrius Andrade. And I said that this fight, that it was going to prove to us how good he actually was. Is he really 10 times better than that of Caleb Plant? Is he really better than Caleb Plant at all? Is he possibly worse than Caleb Plant? And I think we pretty much got our answer within this fight. I think that Andrade is probably around the same level as that of Caleb Plant, but he didn't really show much difference within this fight. I think, to be honest with you, that Andrade, that he might even be possibly a little bit bigger than Caleb Plant. But he didn't really show, sure, he was throwing first and he was doing certain things. But to be honest with you, the thing that Andrade was supposed to have the advantage in over Caleb Plant was going to be the offense and the counterpunching ability. And to be quite honest with you, Andrade did not really have a great amount of counterpunches within this fight. I did not really see a great amount of counterpunches within this fight. When you talk about great performances where a fighter had great counterpunches, I'm thinking of Fury versus Wilder, where he had the great left hand and the great right hand to kind of offset Wilder and to counter him. On top of that, the lead hand jab, or the fake, kind of faint left hook. I'm thinking about Terrence Bud Crawford, where he would counter Errol Spence with a great right hook or a great left hand after he would set him up with a lead hand or wait for him to come in and then back off and try to hit him with a right hook. I'm thinking about Inoue versus Stephon Fulton, where he would have a great counter with that jab to the body and then the right hand up top. Andrade almost had, just like Caleb Plant, no super duper intelligent counter strikes within this fight. And that's the reason why eventually he kind of wore out. But once again, for you to be allegedly, because I keep hearing from so many people over these past 10 years about Andrade this and Andrade that, and that y'all don't know how good Andrade is. Well, we finally did see how good he is. And the truth is that he was never as good as what a lot of people tried to prop him up to be in the first place. And I like Andrade. He seems like a very nice guy outside the ring. And he does seem like a very good fighter. He was very successful in the amateurs. And who knows, it could just be age. The man is 35 years old, I believe. He probably did age a little bit. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, how much age is he really? Because it's not like he's been fighting big fights throughout his career. He really has never even beaten a former, world champion before. He's never even beaten a guy, I believe, that formerly held a legitimate belt. So his resume is severely lacking. Once again, I do not always blame that on Demetrius Andrade. But after taking a look at this fight, and I keep telling people this is why and this is what I kept saying about Canelo Alvarez for the longest time, and people kept saying to me, oh, you're crazy. Canelo's not fighting the undefeated black fighters in Jermall Charlo and Andrade. Those two fighters are not super far above Caleb Plant. If at all, they're not super far above Billy Joe Saunders. They're not super far above any of those fighters. And I was proven 100% correct in that assessment. Both Jermall Charlo and Andrade, they're really not that much better than Caleb Plant. To be honest with you, they're really not better than Caleb Plant at all. And we know how we know that because Caleb Plant ended up actually surviving a 12-round fight against David Benavidez. He was actually legitimately able to win probably about 4 rounds within that fight. Potentially, some may even argue 5 rounds within that fight. You could have a legitimate debate that Demetrius Andrade maybe won 1 or 2 rounds within this fight. You could have a legitimate debate. Now, you could possibly say that he won 3 rounds. But after the tire out, after the first 3 rounds, it just did not look good after that. And let me also state this. David Benavidez was possibly open to certain counters in here. He was winging that right hook. There was a very possible chance that Andrade could have backed off or maybe slid to that of his left. Andrade, talking about his left and countered him with the overhand left over the top. Andrade did not show any great counter-punching ability within that of the mid-range or within that of the outside range. He didn't show it. And Caleb Plant really didn't show a great amount of that ability either. But once again, I kept hearing all this shit about for the past 10 years about how Andrade is this and how he's that. And, he's the best fighter in the world. That's why all these guys are avoiding him. And I think that certain people did avoid him because they thought that he was probably a little bit too crafty for the reward. But was he ever really as good as what people tried to prop him up in the first place? In my view, no. Now, in your personal view, it just might be that he was in the wrong weight class, and it just might be the fact that he's getting a bit older and 35 years old. It could be, but a lot of the flaws that Andrade has, I think that also were somewhat exposed in this fight. He does not have the greatest defense I've ever seen. That doesn't mean that it's bad. He certainly was defending a certain amount of the shots. But with that being said, Benavidez was able to land a certain amount of the jabs and the straight right hands within this fight. You know, he was able to land a certain amount of the hooks even before Demetrius Andrade started tarrying out in this fight. You know, so once again, you know, and Andrade seems like a very decent guy. And I think that he's a great talent, or was a great talent. But after this, do I see him doing much in his career? No. And I already stated this. If Andrade ends up losing this fight, he pretty much can kiss his career goodbye. And if he got knocked out in the mid-rounds, he might as well just retire today. Because there's no one that's going to fight him. Canelo was not going to fight him. Jamal Charlo was not going to fight him. Why the hell would they want to fight you? You know, on top of that, you might potentially be risky for them. They never really wanted to fight you in the first place. I mean, they might fight you potentially, but I highly doubt it. You know, you might have to get in the ring with, you know, Janibek, Caleb Plant, you know, David Morrell. You might have to get in the ring with fighters like that. And is Andrade even going to potentially beat fighters like that? I'm not quite sure if he can beat fighters like that. I guarantee you that he's not defeating David Morrell. But when you even talk about certain fighters like a Janibek, you know, or a Caleb Plant, is Demetrius Andrade even going to defeat fighters like those? I'm not quite sure. And once again, I've been saying this about Andrade for years. I've been hearing from his fan base all in my comment section and all this other stuff. Oh, you don't watch Andrade fights and all this other stuff, you know. And I keep telling people, name me a performance where Andrade looks like one of the top 10 best fighters that you've seen within the sport of boxing. I've never seen it. I've never seen it. And he showed it once again in this fight that he was never on that level. Just in my personal view. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe he just got older. Maybe he was just at the wrong weight class. But in my personal view, I think that he was up against a fighter that probably had a greater will than him. I think that Andrade was a little bit nervous. I think that I was right in this fight. And I think he knew that Benavidez was going to be a severe threat. And I think in the back of Andrade's mind, he knew more than likely that Benavidez probably had the better chance of winning this fight. Just in my personal view. Just in my personal view. I mean, you know, once again, the stamina I thought was going to be an issue later on down the fight. I thought if a stoppage was going to happen, that it was going to be within 9 or 10 rounds. The stoppage ended up happening after 6 rounds because they had to stop it. Andrade was getting the shit kicked out of him from pillar to post. I mean, it was going to get to the point where he was going to get irreversible brain damage if the fight had continued. He wasn't getting dropped again, but once again, you have to kind of save, you know, a fighter from themselves, you know. And I just don't know where Andrade's career goes from here, once again, because who really is going to want to fight you? It's very unfortunate, and I do think that he is a little bit more of the unfortunate stories than that of boxing. But do I also think that he's been one of the more overrated fighters in terms of boxing for the past 10 plus years? Yes, personally I do. I've always stated that. I stuck by that opinion, and I ended up being proven correct in this assessment. It just is what it is. And a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me, but I think that some of the faults that Andrade has, which means sometimes that he wings that left hand, he wings his punches, which was shown in this fight. You know, he did not have his greatest counter-punching ability as what people said. He's never been a super great A-grade puncher. He can be hurt. He can be knocked down. He can be hurt with a punch. He does not have the strongest chin. He does slow down in the second half of fights. And his defense is a little bit overrated. It doesn't mean that he's not a great, a very decent all-around fighter, a great all-around talent. But, you know, the greatest talent of the middleweight divisions of the past 10 plus years? No, not even close. Not even close. It is what it is. And, you know, once again, I like Andrade. You know, he seems like a very great guy, very great personality, relatively intelligent fighter. But he did have some faults. It just is what it is. You know, he did have some faults. And once again, you know, I wonder what the LDBC and New Media's excuse is possibly going to be, because I know that Aki TV claimed that Andrade was going to win this fight. You know, and then apparently Dante also predicted that Andrade was going to win this fight. So I wonder what they're going to say. You know, because we all know that at 35 years old, Lomachenko ain't getting no excuse when he loses to Devin Haney. You know, Canelo been fighting for 18 years. You know, he ain't getting no excuse when he loses fights. You know, even when he's fighting the bigger man in Demetrius Bivol. You know, he's not getting any excuses. So I wonder if they're going to keep the 100% same energy with this fight. I just wonder. You know, it is what it is. But anyways, just in terms of David Benavidez, just to talk about what both fighters did right in the fight, or what they did wrong. I think that Andrade, of course, at his gas tank was the main thing wrong. I also don't think that he had great counter-punching ability, as many people hyped him up to have. Kind of same thing with Caleb Plant. That was also a big issue. He did not have great counter punching in certain mid-range, and he kind of just threw to throw, or threw to throw, when it came down to it. So once again, I thought that was a little bit of a problem. And with some of the punches that Benavidez was throwing, I thought that if he really had that great skill set, that he should have countered. There were certain winging punches that Benavidez was throwing as well that should have not been as effective as what they were. It just is what it is, but eventually they were, But what do I believe Benavidez was doing right in the fight? I think that he was smart being cautious a little bit early. His head was moving a lot better in this fight, and I give him a lot of credit for that. He has improved that. He certainly heard from the detractors and the critics, and I think that he certainly has improved that. That shows great intelligence, in my view, in the boxing ring, because many people don't like to improve their game. Many people don't like, to go with the lack of hubris. And David Benavidez and the Benavidez family, they're a very prideful and proud family, so I have to give him a lot of credit for probably listening to certain people and starting to change levels and move his head a little bit more. It certainly did help him in the fight. Now, that being said, I still don't think that he has the best footwork, and at times he can still be a little bit squared. And that Mexican shell defense, I don't always think is the most effective form of defense. But Benavidez is just a very awkward fighter. He's a guy that can hit you from a lot of angles. He's a guy that loves to hit you on the inside, bully you on the inside, kind of, wait for you, to get drained a little bit. And let me tell you what, even at times when he was pushed back a little bit, he was still able to fight back a little bit. Not greatly, but he was still able to fight back to a degree. So once again, I give him a lot of credit for that. I give him a lot of credit. But of course, Benavidez, I thought, to be honest with you, that he probably could have started off to the body a little bit sooner. He did eventually do that, probably starting in the third and the fourth round, which is pretty much what he needed to do. You could tell that some of those body punches were really making Demetrius Andrade wins. I remember a good right hook that got delivered right to the ribs or right to the side of Andrade, right around his guard. And you can tell that Andrade, that he felt it. His face changed a little bit, and he was wincing under the pressure a little bit. Which of course you're going to. Benavidez is a natural light heavyweight, potentially even a little bit bigger than that. And he's a guy that, he's a bully type of fighter. He's known for his power, he's known for his speed, and he's known for his great engine. He's known for his great stamina, his great gas tank. So Andrade was in a lot of trouble once his legs and once his stamina started going out the window. There was no way he was going to win that fight. No way. Not unless he had the power to keep Benavidez back, and he doesn't. It just is what it is. He does not have enough power. He doesn't have that type of power, to really keep David Benavidez back. It just is what it is. But Benavidez was doing a good job hitting certain awkward angles on the inside. The hooks and the uppercuts were pretty much what I expected. They were very good, very effective in the fight. I would just say that Benavidez at times, that his defense does need to be a little bit better. His feet, I don't think, are ever going to be great. But Benavidez, one thing that he can improve on, as well as Jose Benavidez, and I said this within my live stream, move in and out a little bit more. Use your feet to move in and outside of the range. You're going to have to do that. Now, the question is that David Benavidez versus Canelo Alvarez fight going to happen? And I'm not quite sure. I think more than likely that he will. I'm just not 100% sure confirmed if it's going to happen next. I wouldn't be surprised if Canelo fights out of Jamal Charlo next or someone like that. I think if he's going to fight another person, that he's going to fight Jamal Charlo next, and then he'll fight David Benavidez. But it sounds like Canelo is focused on another target for that of May, and then I believe he will fight David Benavidez in September. I definitely believe the fight will happen. I'm just not sure if it's going to be next. So if Canelo doesn't do it next, there's going to be a lot of criticism going towards his way. But the thing is that is most important about Canelo is that he just fights David Benavidez. And I think that he will fight him next year, of course, unless he ends up losing, his first fight in May. But, we'll see what happens. But that's pretty much what I predict. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, that's pretty much about it for this video. Very impressed by that of David Benavidez. And it could maybe be just that Andrade was a little bit older and maybe just a little bit lighter. I don't know. But to be honest with you, Andrade looked pretty much the same size as David Benavidez in this fight. Maybe it was because, he gained a little bit. But if you're supposed to be that greatly skilled as what people said that you were, unless you believe that age was that much of a factor for Andrade, you were still supposed to win this fight because you were allegedly supposed to have great power. You were allegedly supposed to be one of the best boxers in the world. You were allegedly supposed to be 10 times better than Caleb Plant, and you pretty much winced out after 3 rounds. So I'm sorry, but once again, I always seen this with Andrade. I always thought that he was a great talent, no doubt about it. But did I ever see him on the level as many other people said that he was? No. It just is what it is. No. And, so far within this fight, I was proven right. Maybe he can come back. I don't know. I would like to see Andrade versus Janibek next, to be honest with you, because I just don't think that there's any great fights at 168 for him. I don't think overall that Canelo. I don't think that Canelo overall is going to fight him at the current moment in time. I don't think that Charlo is going to. I don't think that a certain amount of those other guys are going to. Just in my personal view, I don't think that they're going to. So once again, that's pretty much about it for today. Hopefully Andrade gets another big fight. He might, but I don't think it's going to be a fight that's going to be greatly winnable, because I think it's going to be against a fighter that probably is very highly dangerous and potentially even bigger than him, or very, very, very much on a dangerous streak, like a Janibek or like that of a, I'm trying to think, Janibek or a David Morrell, but one of those fighters. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you later, and we'll see where this goes.